In today's video, it's jam-packed with unique fall DIYs that are my absolute favorite. Welcome to CreArtive by Nature DIY and Decor. My name is Donna. So this video is a compilation of all my favorite fall DIYs, and I've got a playlist with all the original videos for you listed at the end of this video in the description box below, as well as pinned in the comments section. Okay, so for this project, you're going to need some vintage doilies. I picked up a selection from the thrift store, but you can also use hand-me-downs. I am using one that's got a decorative edge, and you'll also need some just plain cotton fabric. I'll be cutting this fabric down to size to fit inside the perimeter of this doily. So to do that, I'm folding it into fours. And then I'm going to fold it kind of like an ice cream cone, just like you see right there. Got a triangle, and I'm going to cut that upper tip right off, and that will round off your edges. Now it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. But I'm just measuring right here to see how big it is, and I want it to be just a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to fold it again like an ice cream cone and trim it off just a wee bit more. I want it to fit inside our doily as best as possible. All right, so for this next part, I am using some crochet cotton thread, and I'm using a tapestry needle, and I just thread my needle. And now I'm doing a running stitch all the way around the edge of my cotton circle of fabric. So I did tie a knot on the one end, and once you go all the way around, you want to pull your strings to gather it all together to create a little sack. Okay, so this is a part I like to do. I'm adding just a few pebbles to the bottom. That just helps to allow it to sit on the surface nicely. Next, you'll want to stuff it full of cotton fiber. I just use some pillows that I pick up from Walmart for really cheap. Pull your strings together to gather the sack together to close it up, and then you can tie it off with a knot. All right, so for this next part, you're going to need a stem. So I have these branches that I foraged and I cut down to size, so you could definitely use that. But if that's not an option for you, you can buy little branches all pre-cut for you from craft stores. And I really like this particular one because it was a small birch branch, and I really like the color of the bark on it. So that's the branch I decided to use. So I used that, and then I used hot glue to adhere it to the center of our little pumpkin puff. And now I'm going to be gathering this doily in around the branch, just like this. I had pre-cut some cotton string. And once you've got your doily all gathered around your stem, you're going to want to tie around using your cotton string. Tie it around and then tie it in a knot. You could also create a bow if you want. If you don't have cotton string, of course you could use some jute twine if you prefer, or some kind of yarn. So once you've tied that off, you can just kind of fluff it up a bit, and there you've got your pumpkin. So I am actually going to decorate this a little further to make it look a little bit more like a pumpkin. I have got this florist wire that I have attached some brown florist tape to create some tendrils by wrapping it around a pencil. Just using a touch of hot glue and putting these into place. I'm not worried about hot glue getting onto these particular little doilies, as those I bought from the thrift store, but if it was a hand-me-down, I'd be a little bit more careful of my glue placement. So for this particular doily, I'm using a plain edge, and as you can see, I have cut a piece of fabric that's the same size as my doily, and I'm going to stitch the two of them together. Again, using cotton string and my tapestry needle, and creating a running edge all the way around the circle. Once you've gone all the way around, I'm going to pull my two strings to again create that sack or pouch of our pumpkin. So I'll just pull those, as I don't want it too tight because again I want to put some pebbles on the inside. Some people use some other things like some glass marbles, or I've seen some people use like lentils and whatnot, but I prefer to use these pebbles. I really like how they sit and I don't have to worry about bugs or anything like that. Once you've got your pumpkin puff all filled up, you can then pull as tight as you can and tie that string off in a knot. So again, I'm just going to use one of these branches as my stem and I'll glue that one into place. And then I'm using this jute wired twine that I found at my local dollar store. And again, I just twisted it around a pencil to create my tendril. I did have to add just a touch of hot glue on each end just to prevent it from fraying on me. But once you got that, you can then just glue those into place. And you can decorate these any way you'd like, but I really just like the simplistic look of these. So I decided I wanted a little leaf on this one, so I just went into my stash and just picked from some scraps that I had. So here's the two we worked on, and then I also created this larger one here, same principle as the decorative edge one that I created already. I love these. I love that you can use some hand-me-downs and thrifted finds for something beautiful like this. All right, we're gonna make a fun and whimsical wreath by using a grapevine wreath. Feel free to use any size that you have. This one was from my stash. I've got this cute little gnome that I picked up from Dollarama, but you can get these at Dollar Tree as well. Next, you're gonna wanna start to fill in around the gnome with some green. Now, I have got this beautiful fern. I picked it up from a local liquidation center, but of course you can get all kinds of different greenery from Dollar Tree, from any dollar store, as well as craft stores. So I like to cut the stems down and then place them where I like before I start to glue everything together. Once you're happy with the look, you can start to glue things down. I just like to go in there with the nozzle and start to add a bit of glue here and there, and you can do the same with the gnome. So now you can start to fill in with anything that you'd like. I've got these beautiful leaves in my stash. They're just an assortment of different leaves that I've had over the years. I'm just going to cut them down and tuck them into place. And if you leave a stem long enough, you can tuck it right into the grapevine wreath. These are some bittersweet berries that I had picked up a few years ago. I think it was from Michael's, but I also have noticed that Dollar Tree has been carrying pip berries as well lately, so you can check them out as well, or again, just anything that you have in your stash or that you'd like to pick up from your craft store. So once you have everything in place, again, you can glue things. And now for another added fun, whimsical touch, I've got these ceramic mushrooms. Now, I broke the stem off of one of them because I needed to create a shorter stem, and I thought the best way would be to use a little branch. So I'm first going to put the tall mushroom into place and fit really well into the grapevine wreath. And then, of course, I added some glue. And then for the shorter one, I again just cut a piece of my branch and glued that mushroom cap on. But again, just use whatever you have in your stash. I know there's lots of different styles of mushrooms out there. So I wanted to add a little mini pumpkin, but I didn't like the stem on this, so I just shoved a little piece of branch in there, and then I tucked my pumpkin into place. So for those of you who've been following me a while, you know how much I love nature, and if you're new, then this is one thing that I love to add is natural elements. I will have a foraging video for all of you down in my description box below, and I will also add that foraging video to my fall playlist for you to see. So I'm just going to tuck different pieces of moss and lichen and birch bark and twigs just here and there, just to make it look like it's a natural forest floor. So just for a little tip here, if you've got lots of glue strings, you can use a blow dryer on a low heat setting and that just melts them right away. It is such a handy tip to use. All right, so now I need to add my hanger. I'm using some wire and I'm going to wrap it in brown florist tape. Now to wrap a wire, you are going to be pulling on this wax tape and rolling it between your fingers until it covers your wire. Now you just want to pull it just enough to pull and activate the wax, and the wax will melt between your fingers and that's what will stick it together. So you're just going to weave that through the vine wreath and then twist it so you've got a nice little hanger right there. I found these items a while back. I found this wooden candlestick for $1. It just needed a really good cleaning. And then I found these ceramic owls. They are to hold a tea light, but I discovered that candles do not fit inside. I got them for $1 each. I really like the brown one, but it's this orange one I was not crazy about. The texture felt more like melted crayons that were dripped all over it. So I decided to give this owl 2 coats of this creamy chalk paint, and it will look so much better. I could have spray painted it, but I was concerned that the spray paint wouldn't adhere to the glossy finish of this owl. So I decided to go with chalk paint. It's got really good adhesion, and I'm being careful not to get paint around the eyes. I don't mind the way the eyes look, but I'm gonna give the rest of it 2 coats. So I allowed the owl to dry really well, and it had some pretty good coverage. Now I am going to give it a coat of satin varnish. I wanted the sheen of this owl to match the other one that I got, and this will also just help to seal up the paint so it doesn't chip off. Again, I'm being careful not to get any on the eyes. I want this to match the other one. And yeah, so I'm just going to give this 1 coat of the varnish. I have now decided to add some dark walnut stain that I had in my stash. You could have used an antique wax, but I don't have any, so I'm just using the supplies I have on hand. And I could have applied this over top of directly onto the chalk paint, but I think it would have absorbed too much of the stain. And I just wanted a little bit of highlighting here and there, and just to kind of distress the owl as a whole just a bit. I did not want to end up changing the color completely. So yeah, I just really like how this turned out. I am so happy with how this little guy turned out. I think he looks so much better. And I love how this little brown owl looks perched up on the top of this candlestick. I applied some oil just to really bring the wood to life, and it looks so much better. And here's how everything looks all lit up. I managed to put some little fairy lights inside this little white owl since candles didn't fit inside. And I did manage to squeeze a little battery operated light into this little guy, and he just looks so cute. So for this DIY, I'm using a pumpkin panel, and I had actually picked that up from Dollarama several years ago. You're also going to need a thrifted sweater. Now you can pick up these pumpkin panels from different locations at different craft stores or dollar stores, so look in your location. So as you can see, I had experimented on that particular pumpkin panel, and I wanted to cover that up, so I flipped it upside down as that's the part that I want to be covered by the sweater. So I'm going to trace around the pumpkin right now with a Sharpie, and then you can take scissors to cut it out. So I didn't bother to trace around the stem, so I'm just going to cut like a little divot out of the area where the stem would be, as I'm going to be doing something else in that spot. So save those pumpkin scraps, save those sweater scraps for another project here at the end. So once you've got that sweater all cut out, then you can start to glue the sweater onto your panel. Now I'm just using hot glue, but of course use your favorite adhesive. So I'm just going in section by section. I don't want to be pulling the fabric too harsh to distort the pattern that we have. I just added a little bit of glue on the center just to help hold it in place, and then I continue to glue around the edge. Next, I flip it upside down, and now I'm just going to trim off the excess sweater. All right, so I realize that I should have done my staining before I put the sweater on, but it is what it is. I'm just going to do it now, but keep that in mind. If you decide to do this and you want to stain it, then you'll want to do that before you apply the sweater. So I'm using the raw umber, burnt walnut by Decor Art, and I'm using a rag as well as a makeup sponge to apply that stain. So my sweater was lifting just a little bit here and there, so I'm just going in and adding a little bit of hot glue. As you can see, I stained the stem as well as the edges of this pumpkin. Okay, now for the fun part and the unique part of this DIY, I'm covering the stem with some birch bark. I love to forage birch bark. I do it quite often when I'm out in the forest. And if you don't have this, you can cover it up with another sweater, or you could use scrapbook paper. I have even seen some people use some twine. Once you have glued down the birch bark with some hot glue, you can just trim off the excess. I like to use some wire snips as the birch bark can be quite thick. So I'm loving how that looks. It looks quite rustic. So now I am just going to create my hanger before I move on. So I'm just creating a loop here with some twine and tying it off with a knot. And then I'm just going to add some hot glue into the hole there. I'm going to press that in. And then I'm going to add some more hot glue over top. And that will really help to secure that twine onto the back of this panel. Okay, so now we're gonna start to decorate the front. I'm creating just a really loose, casual, loopy bow with a couple of strands to create the tail. I'm gonna kind of treat that a bit like tendrils in a way. So, of course, you can use whatever you like for your decorative elements. I just wanted to keep this a little simpler. Next, I'm adding some leaves. These are just from my stash, but of course, feel free to use whatever you have on hand. And then I'm just going to start to layer all my pieces. So I've got a couple different sized leaves, my loopy twine bow, and I even have some pine cones. And I happened to find these cute little tendrils that were in my stash. It was attached to like a little cluster of fall foliage. I trimmed those off and I added those in as well. So I'm loving how this looks. I think it's very, very unique. Has that really cozy fall feel to it. I love it hanging on the wall. I think it looks awesome. All right, so for this project, I'm using a set of 3 cylinder vases, and you'll need 3 different sweaters. I am trimming off these sweater sleeves, as that's what we are going to be using over the cylinder vases. I just picked these sweaters up at the thrift stores. So of course I set those sweaters aside, as we're going to be using those in my next project. Here I'm going to just kind of play around and see what looks best for the style of sweater on these cylinder vases. This one I'm just folding over the cuff and just kind of playing around, and then I will be trimming off the excess sweater fabric on the bottom. As you can see here, I am just making sure that I am even to the bottom, and I'm going to set that one aside for now and work on the next one. So this sweater is actually quite chunky, so I'm putting it on this really chunky vase. I'm just trimming off the excess, and then I decided that excess I'll just tuck inside the vase. But to keep it in place, I did need to apply a little bit of hot glue inside and then fold the sweater over and press the sweater into the glue. Now, if you plan on reusing these vases, you can just heat them up with some hot water and that hot glue comes off really well. So here I decided to add a little bit of hot glue just to help hold this sweater onto the vase at the base. So I ended up having to trim off a little excess there, and it looks really good. Now for this gray sweater, I'm just going to, again, just slide it on over and just play around until I get the look that I am happy with. Okay, so I've got all my vases ready to go, and now I'm adding the filler. I have these feathers, and what I did to extend them was I tied some branches onto the bottom, and that gave them some height. I also have this curly branch and these beautiful mustard yellow, or like a golden yellow floral that I picked up from Dollar Tree. I love these. I am loving this color for fall this year. So I'm just mixing those into the gray vase. And then I've got these cotton stems. I believe I picked these ones from Michael's a few years ago, but you can get these at Dollar Tree as well. And then I'm going to add some branches. Now these branches are foraged, and they had a little bit of this golden yellow lichen that are on there, and it matches so well with those golden yellow florals that I have. Love how this is looking. I think they are so gorgeous. Of course, feel free to fill your vases with whatever style that you like. Okay, so for this project, you're going to need those scraps of sweater pieces that we had from our last few projects and a styrofoam wreath in any size of your choosing. I'm cutting the sweater scraps down into strips, and I'm just going to be using an assortment. I want to make sure I have a few pieces that have got patterns on them and then some of the solids. And I'm just creating an assortment of different sizes. So once you have those strips cut down, then you're going to start to glue your sweater pieces into place. You want to make sure the seams are all at the back. So I just glue that into place, and then I'll trim off any excess and then glue that seam, and you'll see that it's always at the back side. So I'm not going to have a specific pattern. I'm just kind of randomly applying the different sweater pieces just to create a balanced look to my eye. So I encourage you to do the same. But you're going to see that I will be leaving some places blank, as I am going to be adding something that's very unique. And so I wanted to make sure I had room to add that. Okay, so you can see where those open spots are, and that's where I decided that I wanted to add some birch bark. So I'm going to just wrap these thinner pieces around and trim up any of the excess, and I will end up having to use quite a bit of hot glue. And I pressed and held this into place, but I realized I was doing that for quite a long time. So what I ended up doing was using some twine, and I'm wrapping it around several times, and that helped to hold the birch bark into place while the glue was setting. It saved me a lot of time. Okay, so I've got my birch bark all in place, and this is where I decided to remove the twine. You could leave it in place if you wanted to, but I had something else in mind, and just so you know, the glue was all set. So this is the other idea I had. I am using some chunky yarns in the shades that are on the wreath. I just started with the gray one. I wrapped it around, tied a knot, and now I'm going to wrap it all around the wreath. This will help to hold everything in place and also give more texture. I'm kind of crisscrossing it as well, and some areas I kind of add a little more, and then other areas I spread it out. So next I just trimmed it off and tied a knot, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some brown. And then you'll see at the end how I actually didn't end up using the cream color. I just felt that it distracted from the birch bark. So just using the gray and the brown. With the brown, I did the same thing, just kind of wrapped it haphazardly all over, and I'm loving how that looks. All right, so now for the hanger. I'm just using a piece of florist wire. It's a heavier gauge. I can't exactly remember the gauge I'm using, but I trimmed a piece, and then you can see I bent it on both sides, and then I'm going to push that into the wreath form, just like this. And then I'm going to bend it up, and you can see how well that created a hanger. Love how that worked out. Just adding some hot glue to make sure it stays in place. And that's it. It's ready to be hung on the wall or on your door. This was a very inexpensive project. I love it. It definitely has that rustic, cozy feel that I was going for the fall season. And it'll look good with all the other sweater projects that I've done. So today I am going to be making some fall gnomes. I have this beer bottle that was given to me, and I am going to measure out a piece of fabric that'll fit around the bottle and also leaving enough for a seam allowance. I'll be using my hot glue today to glue down the edges of the fabric together. Once I have one side of my fabric glued together, as you can see, I'm laying it out and I have my seam facing upwards. I am then going to glue the bottom part together and turn it inside out. If you're new here, I want to say welcome, and I'd love for you to join my community by tapping on the subscribe button along with the bell to keep up to date with everything I have to share. Now I'm going to slip the bottle inside the tube of fabric that I made, and then I'll be tying it off with a piece of jute twine. Now I'm just trimming off a bit of the excess fabric. Okay, so now onto the hat. I have this lighter colored piece of burlap and I'm fraying the edges by removing some of the strands. I am really loving the neutral colors for this fall, and thought this burlap was perfect for that, and I really wanted to try my hand at making a more rustic looking gnome for fall. So I've just got my square burlap, and as you can see, I lifted up one side of the burlap and I'm going to glue it into place. Then fold over the other side and glue that piece into place. Okay, so I kind of measured out where I wanted my hat to end, and I'm just going to trim it off at that point. I've decided to tie off the very top portion of my fabric just to narrow it down and to make it easier to pull my hat over top of the bottled fabric. Once you have that all tied off, you can measure to make sure that your hat fits, and this one fits perfectly. I'm now going to be using some raffia, and I'm creating some large loops. Once you have the desired amount of loops, you can tie that off, and then using some scissors, you're going to cut through all the loops. I'm just trimming off the longer strands a little bit just to help even it out a bit. I'm also kind of scrunching up the raffia a bit just so it's not so straight and stiff. Okay, so now I'm going to put the hat into place, and remember you need the seam of the fabric on the back side of the bottle. Then I will be placing my beard into place using some hot glue, and I will be pulling the hat over top, and I will be gluing that into place as well. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim the beard just to give it a more authentic look, and then it is time to add your nose. I love to use these solid wood beads. I have used beads that have got the holes in them as well, and you could also use pom-poms. So I'm just going to add some glue and tuck that in under the hat. I decided to make the beard a bit more full, so I'm just creating some little loops with the raffia, and then I am going to be just gluing those up underneath the nose. I have these little wood embellishments that I picked up at a Canadian dollar store called Dollarama. I have seen some wood stickers at Dollar Tree before. You could use those as embellishments as well. I am staining them with an ink pad just to give it more of a fall color. So So now I'm just figuring out the placement I'd like. And I've decided to just glue down the tip of the hat. I kind of like that look. And once you have the placement of the wood pieces figured out, then you can use some hot glue and put those into place. And there you have your first fall gnome. Really easy supplies to get your hands on. Okay, for our next gnome, I'm using a beer bottle again. You could use a wine bottle, or you can get those bottles you can see in Dollar Tree, any type of bottle you have. Now, I am going to be using some wine bottle lights. I picked these up at a local store. I have seen them at Dollarama and a few other places. You can also get them online. I am going to feed those lights into the bottle, and you could use a bamboo skewer to push them down further into your bottle if needed. Amber glass is really on trend this year for fall, so that's why I'm going with the beer bottle. It is a gorgeous color and it'll be perfect for my decor this year. Okay, so I am going to be using burlap again. I really love burlap for fall. And to make the hat, I am going to use the same procedures as I did before. So I'm gonna just check to see if this hat fits over the bottle, and it does. I made sure that the switch was at the back side of the hat. Again, I'm wanting that rough, ragged seam showing at the front, and here I'm just roughing up the bottom edge. Okay, so for something different, I'm using some jute for the beard. I am wrapping it around my fingers approximately 30 to 40 times, then use another piece of jute twine and tie those loops together. Then using some scissors, you can cut through the loops. So I'm just going to figure the placement again, and then I'll be using some hot glue and applying it directly to the bottle. So I'm going to slip the hat over top, and again having that jagged seam at the front, and then I will be gluing my hat into place onto the bottle. So again, I'm going to be using this solid wood bead and gluing that into place. So I'm just going to trim off the beard just to kind of round it off a bit to give it a more authentic look. And now I have decided that I'm going to give this guy a mustache. So I'm just going to make a double loop bow, multi-loop bow, and then I'm going to tie it off in the center, then cut through all those loops. I'm just trimming off the ends a little bit, and then using some hot glue, I am going to tuck that little mustache up underneath the nose. Again, I'm going to use these wood embellishment pieces and an ink pad. You could use some full leaves, or even some berries would be really nice. And if you like little bows, you could add a bow. But I just want my piece to be very natural and rustic looking, so I'm just going to stick to these wood pieces. And again, I'll be using hot glue to put them all into place. I again am going to glue down the tip of the hat. It's just something I really like to do. It just gives it a bit more of a casual look. As you can see, you can access that switch on the battery pack for the lights on the back side. So just a quick little note here, I forgot to show you how to change out the battery pack. So I actually ended up kind of opening up the peak of the hat, and then I was able to access the battery pack by pulling it right through. Another option would be to add Velcro onto the hat so you can easily access that, but I didn't end up having any problems. But I really do love how this guy turned out. And this one too, it was so fun. I love the raffia beard. And if you use a fabric that's thin enough, you can just leave the seam on the bottom, or you can trim it off and glue to the bottle like I did for my sweater vases that I showed you earlier. For first DIY, you're going to need an artist panel that is made out of wood, and this one is 12 by 16. I was inspired by this piece that I saw on Zulily. It's from the Kendrick Home collection, and I just fell in love with it, and I knew that I could recreate this in my own style, so I'm going to be creating a fall look for less. I flipped my panel upside down, and I'm going to give the frame a coat of this walnut gel stain I got from Decor, and I'm going to be using a makeup sponge to apply this stain. So I got my wood panel from a store called Dollarama. I have seen these in some other stores as well. You can also purchase them online. So I'm going to give the entire frame portion a coat of the walnut stain and allow it to dry. Next, I'm going to be using some painter's tape, and I'm butting it right up against the edge of the frame and pressing it up. I wanted to protect the stain coverage that I did, as I'm going to be painting the inside of our wood panel with some paint. Once your painter's tape is all in place, you can then apply your craft paint. So I'm using this dark gray that I picked up from Michael's, and it's the same shade as seen in our inspiration piece. So I'm going to give 2 to 3 coats of this paint and allow it to dry well. So this is the first coat of paint. I am going to go in with a larger brush and apply some more paint, and I'm going to apply the paint in longer, smoother strokes and then allow it to dry. Once our canvas board is all painted and stained, you can then add your hanger. I am finding the center here, which is 6 inches, and then I am going to be placing my hanger right into the frame. My frame is about 1 centimeter thick, and I just wanted to make sure that my nails go into that part, and then it's ready to be hung on the wall if you desire. So I wanted to create that matte look that was in our original inspiration piece. So it was kind of a bit more, I'd say, like a satin or an eggshell kind of a look. So I knew that I could achieve that look using some decoupage glue. So I'm just applying it with some paint with a paintbrush, and then I'm going to be taking a plastic card and smoothing it out just so I don't have too thick of a layer. Allow that to dry well, and then you can move on to the next step. I went into Cricut Design Space and I uploaded an image that I had that I wanted to use. I removed all the line work, and that left me with this silhouette. And I loved how this looked. It reminded me of seed pods. In the inspiration piece, I had a flower, and I didn't quite think that it looked kind of fall-like. So now I sent my image to my Cricut Joy machine, and I'm cutting it out on some matte white permanent vinyl. I'll, of course, remove this vinyl from my mat, and then using some transfer tape, I'm figuring out the placement first, flip it back over so that the sticky side is down, and then burnish my vinyl onto my board. Now, I haven't done too much vinyl work, and I did not burnish my piece well enough, so it did start to lift in spots, but of course you can just go back in and burnish it some more until it stays. Once your image is in place, you can remove the transfer tape and it's ready to be hung on your wall. I love this. This is something I was so excited to try, and I'm so pleased with how well it turned out. Perfect for a modern farmhouse look. For our next DIY, I am using this styrofoam pumpkin that I picked up from Dollar Tree last year. I removed the stem and I'm just creating a larger hole at the top. So this is the inspiration piece. I found a bark covered pumpkin at Wayfair and it was $37.99. And of course I knew I could recreate this as I love to forage birch bark. So I dove into my stash. But first I needed to give this pumpkin a coat of just some cream paint. You could use white as well. I didn't want the orange to really stand out, and I gave this pumpkin 2 coats of my paint. Once your pumpkin is all nice and dry, it is time to add the birch bark. So I'm using some thinner pieces that I had torn off of my larger pieces that I had in my stash. This is birch bark that I had foraged from the forest last year. I left it in longer strips just to make it easier to cover the pumpkin. So I'm using some hot glue to apply the pieces of birch bark onto the surface, and the hot glue did not melt my styrofoam, which was awesome. So you can also apply the glue straight onto the pumpkin and then apply your birch bark. I found that using the longer strips of birch bark also made it easier and faster to cover the piece. So if you look at our inspiration piece, you could see that they used a lot of small and textural pieces. So once I had my pumpkin covered, I started to add some small pieces that had lots of texture on them, as you can see here. And then that gave it more of the look that we were going for off of our inspiration piece. So now I'm just going to add some thinner pieces of birch bark to the bottom. You could also use a piece of felt or a fabric, use whatever you desire. I had these nice thin pieces, so that's what I chose to use. So now it's time to decorate the top. I am going to be using a larger stem piece that I had in my stash. I picked it up from a dollar store. I have some pine cones again from my stash. I'm adding a little bit of Spanish moss, and I'm using some florist wire and brown florist tape to create my tendrils. So you want to wrap the wire with the tape, and you want to twist and allow the heat from your fingers to melt the wax that's on the tape, and that allows it to hold together. You're also pulling on it gently and twisting at the same time. Once you have it covered, you'll then cut your wire into 3 pieces, and then you can use that for tendrils. I like to create tendrils by wrapping the wire around a pencil, as seen here. Make sure you leave a straight edge to apply it to your project. So I am using some Spanish moss just to cover up some of the mechanics you see there on the top of my pumpkin, and I just really like that rustic look that Spanish moss gives, and it also just adds a little bit more of a high-end look. So once that's in place, you can then add your stem, generously apply some hot glue to the bottom, and put the stem into place. Now I'm going to add the pine cones that I had. Again, that was what was in our inspiration piece. You could add anything you like. I already had these pine cones, so I really like that look. And then I'm also going to add my tendrils. Again, just use some hot glue on the stem and push them into place. Once you have your tendrils all put into place, it is ready to display on a shelf. I absolutely love how this turned out. I love the rustic high-end look that this has. Perfect for that rustic farmhouse look that I absolutely love. first fall DIY, I have some chalk paint and this candlestick from Dollar Tree. I am going to give the candlestick 2 coats of the chalk paint and allow it to dry well in between coats. Once the candlestick is all dry, I'm taking a sanding block and I'm distressing the edges. I am going for a rustic farmhouse look for my fall decor, and I really love the way a little distressing on chalk paint looks. Once you've achieved the desired look, take a rag and remove all the dust. So now I am going to be using some dark walnut stain, and I'm applying it with a rag, and I'm going all over the surface of the candlestick. I love doing this technique to get a really nice rustic farmhouse look. I love the way it makes it look old and aged, and I am just going to rub it all over, and I'm also going to get it into the crevices. You could leave the candlestick just as is before you stained it, but again, I am going for the rustic farmhouse look. Once you've achieved the desired look, you're going to allow this to dry well. I'm loving this candlestick now. It looks very vintage and rustic, and it looks great with the glass candle. I have these beautiful leaf lights from Dollar Tree. I am going to give each leaf 2 coats of my favorite chalk paint. I didn't want them to just look like a piece of plastic while they are on display, not lit up. So I am going to cover them up with chalk paint and just kind of give them a bit of dimension. Just a little tip, to paint these, I gather them in my hand as you see here, and I paint each leaf one at a time. And once you are completed one leaf, you drop that one down and then move on to the next one. I do allow these to hang to dry, and I did give them 2 coats of the paint. Now for a little dimension, I am going to add my golden yellow ink pad to the tips of the leaf, and I love how this turned out. It is so pretty in my fall decor, and I just love the simplicity of these. And here are those beautiful leaf lights all lit up. I really like how this looks, and they even look beautiful when they're not all lit up. So for this project, you're going to need some leaf garlands. I picked up 3 from Dollar Tree several years ago. You're also going to need an embroidery hoop in any size of your choosing. I am only going to be using the inside portion of this hoop. Next, you're going to attach the garland on one end with a piece of wire and then wrap the garland around. I end up using a total of 3 garlands. Using 3 garlands will give it a nice and full look. So I have my garlands all wrapped around, and I'm just kind of fluffing this up as needed. Next, I'm going to be using these beautiful stems with little mini pumpkins on them. I picked these ones up from Dollar Tree. I know they've had them the last few years. I don't know if they have them this year or not, but they are just gorgeous. And what's nice about them is that they have got leaves on them. So again, it just helps to fill this in really nicely. So I'm just going to be tucking them in here, and I also trim them down. And then again, I'm using wire to attach them to the embroidery hoop. Of course, feel free to use some florals if you'd prefer, but I don't know, there's just something about these pumpkins. I just think they are so beautiful. So here I am adding another color. They are a darker, kind of more burnt orange color. Just again, beautiful. And I'm really loving how nice and full this wreath is coming together. It was very inexpensive, but yet it has a nice, rich look to it. So again, here I am using jute twine to create a hanger. You'll just want a nice long strand, and then I always like to fold it in half and tie the two ends together, and then I wrap the loop end of this strand in around the wreath and pull the ends through, and it just creates a really nice long hanger. It just gives you lots of options as to where you can hang it, but if you don't need a hanger, then you can definitely omit this step. There we go. I'm just absolutely loving this wreath. It's beautiful. I still have it and still use it today. Okay, so we all love these Dollar Tree pumpkins, and I'm just taking the stem out as well as the tag, and I am going to cut a hole into the top. So I have this bottle and I'm going to place it in the hole, and that will be my holder as I paint the pumpkin with this chalk paint. I love this chalk paint. It's my favorite color, and I will leave the name of it down in my description box. So as you can see, the handle makes it easier to coat this pumpkin, and I do give the pumpkin 2 coats of the chalk paint. So I have this piece of cheesecloth from my stash that I had coffee stained quite a long time ago. And I am going to place the pumpkin in the middle of the cheesecloth and just lift the sides and tuck it into the hole. To coffee stain, it is really easy. You just need good strong coffee, soak your cheesecloth, remove the excess, and lay out to dry. Next, I have this paper covered wire from Dollarama. You could also use some floral wire and wrap it in florist tape. And now I'm taking that wire and wrapping it around a pencil to create some tendrils. Okay, so now that that's done, I am adding this wood stem from Dollar Tree or from your yard and place that in the middle. And then I tuck my tendrils inside around the twig as well. You could glue all your pieces into the place. That is optional. I chose not to, so I can reuse these pumpkins at a later date. So I have this really old aged paper, and I decided to cut some leaves out of it. I cut 3 for my project. Now I'm taking the leaves and I am going to just add a little dab of glue and glue them into place, and then I'll just shape them a little bit. So on to our next pumpkin. As you can see, this pumpkin has a larger hole cut out, and I have this crocheted doily from my stash. I'm going to tuck the edges into the center of the doily. It is quite bulky, that's why you need a larger hole. And then again, I'm adding a stem that I picked up from Dollar Tree or your yard, and I am going to be using some white tendrils from some paper wrapped wire. So for something different, I am going to be using these spring Dollar Tree florals, and I'm snipping off a piece of the leaf. I'm adding just a touch of glue, and I am gluing it to the underside of the tendril. As you can see, I added the glue to the top part of the leaf. I didn't want to get any hot glue onto the doily, as I want to be able to reuse the doily and didn't want to damage it with any of the glue. I'm so pleased with how these Dollar Tree pumpkins turned out. I love the rustic farmhouse look of them all. They look wonderful in the decor. The first thing you're going to need is assortment of fabrics. I have a orange gingham check as well as this natural cotton. And now I'm making a mixture of coffee and ground cinnamon. I heated it up and mixed the two together. You could add essential cinnamon oil instead if you choose, or cinnamon flavored coffee. I soaked the fabric, laid it out on a cookie sheet, placed it into the oven, and set the oven for 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you are going to want to watch this closely. You don't want your fabric to burn, but it does dry quickly at this temperature, and it leaves you with a really unique texture, as you can see here. You can see the difference between the undyed fabric and the dyed fabric. Next, you're going to need a bottle. This one is nice and tapered. I had tomato sauce in there. And for something different, I'm going to show you how to cover up your bottle using a sweater. Now, you could use a sock if you choose, but I wanted to try something different, as I have never shown a gnome using a sweater in this way before. So I'm just trimming off the part I don't want to use, and now I'm rolling the sweater over my bottle, and then I'm going to cut the amount out that I need. And I'm making sure that I have a top portion that is taller than our bottle, and that gives us plenty of room to work with. Flip your fabric over, and then again you're going to roll the fabric over and figure out approximately how much of an overlap you need to create a seam. I have lots of gnome tutorials here on my channel. I will make sure I leave the playlist for you down below so you can see all the different ways of creating gnomes. So now I am going to use plenty of hot glue, and I'm pressing the other side of my fabric into that glue, and there you have a sweater sleeve. Now, you could use the sleeve from the sweater if you choose, if it's nice and narrow and fits your bottle well, but of course this sweater didn't have a sleeve left. I used it for another project. I slip the bottle into the sleeve, and then I'm going to glue the bottom portion on. As you can see, I didn't cover up the flat part of the bottom of the bottle. I wanted to make sure that it would sit nicely on my surface. I'm going to tuck the excess on the top inside of my bottle. If you had the lid, you don't need to do that part. You could just twist the top and tie it off. Next, you're going to be cutting down the cotton fabric into approximately 1 centimeters wide strips, and I'm just crunching them up. It helps to loosen up all those loose threads, and I'm going to pull them. You do want to leave them really nice and rustic. That's what gives this a really authentic primitive look. I've set the fabric strips aside, and now I'm going to create the hat using the gingham check fabric that I had dyed. I'm going to create a cone shape out of that square piece of fabric, and I'm just going to fold over one side and bring the other side over. And before I glue it together, I always make sure that it's going to fit over the top of my gnome, and this one fits well. I made sure that I left enough room, as I am going to be creating quite a chunky beard, so just make sure that the rim is wide enough to accommodate that. Again, using your hot glue, you're going to glue the seam down and then trim off the excess fabric. I kind of like to round off my edges, as you see here. That creates a nice hat. You can fray the edges of your fabric if you choose. So here I'm just making sure that my hat fits, and then you're ready to start to assemble the rest of the pieces. So here I'm just figuring out how long I want my strips of fabric. I am going to be using some longer strands as well as some shorter strands just to create a really cool looking beard. So I place some of the strands on just to make sure I have enough cut out, and then I slip the hat over just to make sure there was enough room to accommodate all the fabric pieces. Now I am going to be adding a strip of glue and placing my fabric into the glue. Make sure that your seam is on the back side. Here I made that mistake, so I just removed some of my strands there, and continue to add some glue and press your fabric ends in there. Here I am using a box just to help stabilize my gnome base, and I'm just going to continue to apply some glue and apply the fabric strips and press that into my glue. As you can see, I started with the long strips and now I'm going in with those shorter strips, and that really creates such a fun beard, wouldn't you say? So I'm done adding all my little fabric strips, and again, making sure that the seam is at the back, I am going to slip my hat on, again, just making sure that everything fits, and I'm going to attach the hat on the back side, making sure the seams meet. Here is a fun touch I decided to try, and that is using cinnamon sticks, some pipe cleaners, and some pom-poms to create some arms. I'm slipping the pipe cleaner and through the cinnamon stick, creating a loop and pulling that through. That's going to help us glue the arm into place under the hat. So the other end, I'm just snipping it off, tucking it inside the cinnamon stick, and then I'm going to use some hot glue to make sure that pipe cleaner is secured to the inside of our cinnamon stick. Here I am going to attach the pom-pom, again just using a dab of hot glue on the opposite end. Then I am going to figure out the placement for our arm underneath the hat, as you will see here. So again, you're going to use your hot glue gun to attach the arms to the body of the gnome underneath the hat rim, as you see there. Do the same thing for the other side. You could use rolled fabric pieces as arms instead, but cinnamon is just such an authentic look for the primitive farmhouse style. So now for the nose, I have this 1-inch size drawer pull that I thought would be perfect for this gnome. I usually use a smaller wood bead, but with the thick chunky beard, I knew a large nose would work well. So I added some hot glue and placed the nose into place underneath the hat rim. And then I'm going in and continuing to add some hot glue to make sure the hat is secure all the way around. Once the hat is all secure, you could leave your gnome as is, but I want to decorate this guy. I went into my stash and I found this mini chalkboard. I removed the clip and I'm going to give it a coat of this unbleached titanium artist paint. Now I'm using artist paint instead of craft paint because I only needed to apply 1 coat of this paint. So I'm adding a coat and then I'm smoothing it out and allowing it to dry well. Now I'm going in with some raw umber craft paint and I'm adding a little bit of water. Using a thick bristled brush, I'm adding some splatters just to give it that kind of grungy look that I love to add to projects. Now for a bit of the primitive look, I'm adding some stitching with a permanent fine marker around the edge of this little sign. To finish this sign off, I am going to be using these fall rub-on transfers that I found from Dollar Tree. They are absolutely gorgeous. So I'm just going to cut out the pieces that I wanted to use on my little sign. This one says Hello Autumn, and then I'm just cutting out some of the smaller embellishments. Once you have all your pieces cut out, you can then remove the backing and figure out your placement for the rub-ons. So I'm putting the Hello Autumn on the middle, and then I'm just figuring out the placement for the smaller pieces. Once you have an idea, you can then use your craft stick and rub over the top of that protective film, and that will transfer this rub-on onto your surface. So for another fun little added touch, I'm using these scrap fabric pieces, and I actually do create 3, and I'm adding some faux stitch marks, again using my permanent fine marker. You can see that this fabric is nice and frayed on the edges, and then I am going to apply them onto the hat using some hot glue. It will create a patch look on our hat. Then next, once you have those patches in place, you can apply the sign to the hands using some hot glue. Make sure you hold the sign in place until the glue sets. Now for a true primitive touch, I am going to be adding some pip berries. So I'm going to be creating a wreath to go just around the hat. You could wind the pip berries around the top of your hat, but I didn't have a sturdy form underneath this hat, so I just decided to create a simple wreath. Once I have the amount measured out, I am then going to just kind of wrap and twist my berries together to create my wreath form. Once I have the form complete, I'm going to slip it over the hat, flip it over, and add some hot glue just to the back side to help hold that wreath into place. And then I'm going to go in and just stretch and pull out the berries, and it's ready to go on display. This primitive country farmhouse gnome turned out so well. He's going to look great in my fall decor.
So the first thing we're going to do is prepare our galvanized birdhouse. So I'm just going to bend the prongs back on the back to remove this front piece, like so. And then I'm also going to remove the stake that came with the piece. Okay, so I'm going to start by just distressing the galvanized piece with a bit of paint. I just want to make it look like it's rusted. So I'm just going to add some paint really sporadically. I am now going to go in with my rag and just wipe some of it off in a dabbing motion. So once you've achieved the look that you want, you're gonna let it dry, and then you're gonna go in with a sanding block and just rough up the surface to make it really look old and grungy. So now that the paint is dry on the silver part of the birdhouse, I'm just going to go in with some cream chalk paint and cover up the orange paint on the roof and on the bottom. I need to hide this part because I don't want any of it showing through. Okay, so once the paint is dry on the birdhouse, I am now going to go in and add some tree bark to the roof line as well as the base of the house. And I'm just going to use hot glue to adhere it. You're adhering the birch bark, make sure you don't cover up this base hole right here, because that's where we're going to be putting our flower and butterfly back. So now I am going to alter the flower and butterfly piece that I removed from the birdhouse. So I'm just going to go in with some chalk paint, and I want to make the flower look like a sunflower. So our flower is pretty much dry to the touch, so I'm just going to go in with my sanding block and just kind of distress it a bit. Just remove some paint off of the edges. I'm just going to go back in and redefine the center of my flower. Okay, so now that our flower is dry, I'm just going to distress the center of it with our sanding block and then adhere it back to the birdhouse. So now I am going to glue my branch in place. I'm just going to see about placement by testing it out where I'm going to have my birdhouse, because the birdhouse is going to get attached to the branch. So that looks about good. I have my clippers. I'm going to just cut it down a bit and then I will be gluing it in place. Now our birdhouse is done, so I am going to adhere it to the inner branch of our wreath. Now keep in mind this is heavy, so I am going to give a generous amount of glue on the back side here to adhere it, and then I will see if it needs any more reinforcement. Okay, so just a tip for you. Make sure the tip of your birdhouse is matched up with the tip of your hoop, just so you know that it's straight up and down. And hold the birdhouse in place until the glue sets. Now I'm going to go in and add some florals and foliage, and I'm going to keep this really simple. Okay, so I ended up pulling out these larger cotton ball stems. Place it with some smaller ones that I had purchased from Dollar Tree. I just found that these ones were too big. So now I'm gonna go in and add the flowers that I have here. They're like mini sunflowers, as well as a bit of the foliage from the stems.
Today I'm sharing with you how to put together a vintage farmhouse look for your table for the Thanksgiving season. So I am going to start off by using some paper doilies. I don't have any chargers, so I decided to tea dye some of these doilies. I preheated my oven to 250 degrees and steeped some green tea. I lay my doilies out onto a cookie tray, and once my tea is steeped enough, I then drizzle some of the tea over top of the doilies. I then take some doilies and layer them on top of each other and continue to add some tea on top. Drain off any of the excess tea and then place the cookie sheet into the oven. Now just keep an eye on them as they do dry quickly. I pulled them out of the oven and I decided to add some more tea. But first I pulled the layers of the doilies apart, and the ones that were on the top I am now going to place on the bottom. And then I'm going to just continue to do that and add some more tea. I just want a little bit more of a darker stain. And again, drain off the excess fluid and place it back into the oven. Once dry, you can remove them from the cookie sheet and set them aside. I love the way these have turned out. It's a great alternative if you yourself don't have any chargers. For my next DIY, I have got these old book pages and I am going to lay them out down the center of my table. There's about 3 different shades of some vintage color. It is perfect for a vintage farmhouse look. So I'm just going to randomly place them on top of each other and underneath. And then I have this lace crochet doily that I'm laying over top, and I'm just using that to measure out the right length for my book pages. And you can see I'm just rearranging things. Once I have the correct placement, I then take my glue stick and start to glue the pages together. I'm just lifting up a corner, adding a touch of glue, and then pressing down. I am going to do this while all the book pages are in place on the table, so I have the correct placement. Once you're done gluing your sheets of paper together, you can then put the crochet doily runner on top, and there you have a gorgeous vintage farmhouse table runner for your Thanksgiving decor. So now I'm going to show you how I'm putting my table setting together. I am placing my tea-stained doily down and this beautiful vintage plate and this beautiful napkin I received from a friend. The dishes are from my husband's Oma. I always love to add a touch of nature to my decor, so I put a piece of grass from my garden there. The cutlery is from when my husband and I got married, and this stemware is from my mom. I love how the place setting turned out. It definitely looks like a vintage farmhouse. Here is the stamp on the back of those dishes that I showed you, and this is a close-up of the pattern. It's very, very pretty. So now for my next project, I have this bread bowl that I was gifted, and I filled it with some natural excelsior. I placed the bread bowl in the middle on my table runner, and I dug into my stash of florals, and I am going to start to place them into the excelsior. I'm not gluing anything into place. I'm just laying them within, randomly placing my flowers. I have a nice stash of some full flowers and some fruits, and I use these time and time again. I'm able to do that because I don't typically glue all my pieces together. And if you buy high quality stuff, you can use all these products for years to come. So I like to add some different colors and textures that just gives your centerpiece a lot of different interest and look. Just use whatever you have on hand. Everything that you've been seeing is stuff that I have had in my home in my stash. So those of you who follow me know that I love to add a touch of nature to my decor. So I went and snipped these dried flower pods from my front yard. This is a close-up of them. I love the colors and the texture. I just think it really adds some unique interest to the centerpiece. I love how the centerpiece turned out. It looks very rustic and vintage, perfect for the fall season, and it's gonna look great on the table for Thanksgiving. And I'm so pleased with how the place settings turned out. These dishes from my husband's Oma were the perfect addition to this Thanksgiving vintage farmhouse look that I was going for. And I am definitely going to be doing this table runner again. I absolutely love how it turned out. I am digging into my stash of old book pages. I have got a selection of craft paints here in some white, off-white, some greens, and grays. I am going to give these book pages a color wash. So I'm dipping my paintbrush into some water and I'm going to add it to my paints, and then I'll apply it to the book pages. As you can see, it gives it a transparent look, so I can still see the text coming through. I also am going to mix my colors together a bit. When you're done painting some of your book pages, just set them aside to dry. So as you can see, I have got 2 different colors of papers, and the way the paints are going to look on the papers will be different. So just play around and experiment. Okay, my papers are now all dry and we're ready to move on to the next step. So I have this Fiskars stencil that was in my stash, and it came with this paper cutter, Now you could use a pencil and some scissors, trace it out, and then cut your leaves out. I am going to use my paper cutter. Another option is to find a template or find another stencil and create your leaf pattern that way. But I'm just going to be using what I have on hand. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like when you trace it out and then cut it out. I actually ended up doing all my leaves this way. I discovered the blade on my special paper cutter was dull. So I just went ahead and just traced them out and then cut them out by hand. Okay, I have all the desired shapes and sizes of leaves cut out. I'm going to distress the edges of the leaves with some mustard yellow ink. This part is optional. Okay, I've distressed the edges. It just added a little bit more color. Okay, so now I have chose a gray yarn. You can choose any color you'd like. You could also use some jute twine. And I'm just cutting different lengths. It doesn't really matter how long you have your strings or how short. I have all my leaves in different piles, as you can see. And I'm flipping my leaves upside down, and then I'm going to put a bead of glue on the back, and that's where I'm going to attach my string. So I've attached assorted lengths of string to all the backs of my leaves. Okay, so I have this branch that I had foraged a while ago from outside, and I had used it in a previous project. I just had removed everything but the string for the hanger. I am now going to tie all my leaves onto the branch. So to make it a little easier to tie your strands of yarn onto your branch, I suggest hanging it up on the wall. So what I do is just allow the leaf to hang in the direction that I want it to be, and then I tie the leaf onto the branch. Okay, so this is optional. I have a metal word from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to glue that onto the branch. So this is some preserved reindeer moss, and I'm going to glue some onto the branch as well as a little bit onto the leaf. And there you have it. I love how natural and organic this turned out. And I love that I didn't have to spend any extra money. Everything was from my stash. So for this project, I am going to be using this wreath wire form along with some jute twine, or you can use a spool of florist wire. You are also going to need some Spanish moss. I'm filling in the frame with the Spanish moss, and I had already tied on my jute string to the frame. Now you're going to take your wire or your jute string and wrap around the moss and the frame and fill in a little extra as needed, as I am here. Continue to wrap it around to help hold all that moss in place, and then you are going to tie it off with a simple knot. All right, so I had gathered up some leaves that I had foraged and these beautiful hydrangea. Those are from my mother-in-law, actually. These are oak leaves. Now, oak leaves are great because they have a higher oil content, so they dry really well. On top of that, you'll either need your florist wire on a spool or jute twine. I decided to use jute twine. You can also get waxed twine from flower shops. I actually am a trained florist, and that's what I used to use all the time in the flower shop. But I just decided that I would try this project out with just regular jute twine that everybody can get their hands on, and it works just fine. So before we start to fill in our wreath, I'm going to cut down my pieces of my branches here with the leaves, and I'm just cutting them down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And then you'll want to start to layer your leaves, and I'm also using these beautiful hydrangeas. Then you're going to lay it on your wreath as I just did here and wrap it around with your twine or wire, whatever it is you're using to create this wreath. Again, you are going to layer your leaves and whatever other florals or what have you've got. I like hydrangeas as well because they dry really nicely too. So I always like to wrap the twine around several times. That will for sure help to hold this into place. The beauty about using these leaves, the oak leaves and the hydrangea, is that it actually does dry really, really nicely. I'm going to just continue on filling in my wreath all the way around. Just another side note here, this wreath is up like flat on one side and then concaved on the other side. I am actually using it upside down. I'm doing this on the flat side. If I flipped it over, you would just end up with a thicker, fuller wreath. As you can see, this is pretty thick and full as it is, so that's just a little option for you. So just continue to fill in your wreath as you see fit, adding in all the beautiful colors of fall. So I'm getting to the end here, and I am just going to continue to build my clusters and wrap them into place. And here I just kind of wove and made sure I didn't crush my other set of leaves that were actually the first bundle that I laid down. I was just very careful not to get them all tangled up. If you do have that issue, then you can just slip some more branches in, and I'll show you how you can just easily tuck extra items in here in a bit. So I'm just going to cut my string off and then just tie the loose end to the frame, and that will help hold it all into place. So I'm just going to fluff the wreath up a bit, and then I am going to gather some other elements that I want to add to my wreath. Here I've got some crab apples. I thought that would be interesting. I also have some grasses, and this here is asparagus fern. So asparagus fern is quite delicate, but I like the orange berries on it. So I just tucked those in amongst the clusters into the string that we had used to wrap everything into place. So I'm just going to continue with these asparagus ferns, and then I am tucking in some grass. Now I got these grasses from my front yard, and I really like the texture of them. So I'm just going to, again, just grab a few pieces in a cluster and tuck them into the string that's wrapped around the wreath. Okay, so now I'm creating my hanger. I took a really nice long strand of some jute twine, tied the two ends in a knot, and then I'm going to wrap or pull the loop through on the form and pull the other ends through to create a nice long hanger. Then you've got options as to where you can hang it. This will dry so nicely and it looks beautiful on our front door. I'm going to share how I transform this old picture frame with the glass still in. I am going to take the backing out of this frame as well as the glass, and then I'm going to take it outside and I'm going to spray paint it with the Heirloom White Satin Rust-Oleum spray paint. And then I'm going to take some sandpaper and just kind of go over it lightly just to distress the frame once it's painted. Okay, so I'm going to clean this glass just to prepare the surface. I'm just using vinegar and water, and then I might go over it with some rubbing alcohol to remove any grease marks. You just want to make sure that paint will still adhere to the glass after using the glass cleaner. Careful when you're handling the glass. It has very sharp edges. Feel free to wear gloves if you'd like. I'm being very gentle with how I'm handling the glass. My glass is prepped, and the next step you could do is you could either freehand or draw on some paper first, or use a printable, whatever works for you. I'm just going to be doing a pumpkin, so I'm going to lightly trace out a pumpkin on my paper. I'm not going for perfectionism here, and just doing a quick light sketch, and then I will show you what to do next. Okay, so once you have your image, you are now going to place it underneath your glass where you'd like it situated. And then you have your template for your painting. Okay, the colors I am using are Naples Yellow Hue, Natural Gray Value 5, Unbleached Titanium, Raw Umber. And these are all acrylic paints. Paint's ready on my palette. My palette is an ice cream pail lid. Water, my paint brushes. I have a round brush. I'd say this is a small to medium sized flat brush, and a large angled brush. I like to start off with my dark colors, and I'll be going over my lines. It's like tracing. I will wet my brush a bit, and I also like to keep a rag on hand so I don't get too much water. And then I might just go with gray, and like I said, I'll go over my lines, and then you might want to go in and add some dark brown. As long as you're starting off with your darkest color, this is the color palette I'm choosing to use. Feel free to use any colors you like. Have my outline all done in my darkest color, so now I'm going to wet my flat brush, and I'm going to go in and use the Naples Yellow.
Okay, so my frame is all dry and you can still see that the wood grain is showing through. Love that. And now I'm just going to go in and just kind of distress it using a sanding block. Okay, so my pumpkin is all nice and dry and I finished distressing my picture frame. So now all you have to do is pop this inside as is. You can put a backing on if you'd like. And there you go. There's your pumpkin art on glass. You can add leaves to it if you'd like. I prefer the simplicity of this one.
So I found this fabric, this green velvet fabric from the thrift store, and I thought it would be gorgeous to make a velvet pumpkin out of it. Love velvet pumpkins. So I'm using a plate as my template, and I'm going to trace around it with a permanent marker, and then I'm going to cut this out to have a nice circle, and that will be so much easier. I'm using some green embroidery floss here, and again I'm just threading it onto my tapestry needle. I'm tying a knot on one end, and then I'm going to do a running stitch all the way around the edge. Okay, so I've gone all the way around the edge, and now I'm just going to pull my two ends of the twine to create my little sack, and then I'm going to pour some pebbles into it. That just helps to allow the pumpkin to sit on your surface better. So now I'm going to just stuff it with some stuffing that, again, I use a pillow from Walmart. I find it's the cheapest way to get some stuffing. And once you've got that filled to your liking, you can then pull the strings and pull it tight, and then you can just tie it off with a knot. So I've left just enough of an opening so I can use a branch as my stem. So I'm just applying that using some glue and pushing it down into that opening. And here I've got some beautiful velvet leaves that were in my stash. Of course, use whatever you have on hand, but I thought these would be perfect for this project. I'm just trimming them down and attaching them with some hot glue. And then next I decided I wanted some tendrils. So I'm just wrapping a florist wire with some florist tape. And then I'm going to cut them down to size. And what I like to do is wrap this around a pen or a pencil, and that creates the curly Q. And then I'll glue this into place. Of course, you can feel free to decorate these any way you'd like. Some flowers would be beautiful as well. All right, so now I'm going to create another velvet pumpkin. This is actually some upholstery grade velvet, and I love the color. I thought it was gorgeous. It was a little bit tougher to work with, but again, I just used some embroidery floss that was the same color as the fabric and did a running stitch all the way around the edge to create a really large pouch. Now this one ended up being quite big. I don't know the exact measurements on this one, but it worked out really well. Again, I filled it with pebbles and then my stuffing. And same as before, you just want to fill it up as best you can, and then you're going to pull your strings tight and tie it off with a knot. This is where it got a little trickier, trying to pull the strings tight enough so I could just have a smaller opening. The gathers were quite thick, but I managed to work with it just fine. All right, so something unique. I found this curly piece of birch bark on a foraging outing, and I thought it would be so cool to use as a pumpkin stem. So I did that. And then I had these neutral colored velvet leaves in my stash, and I thought this would be something kind of fun and different as well. So I glued those all in place, and then I'm going to just use my taped wire as my tendrils again as well. A nice little touch too, if you don't want to do the tendrils, would be to add a little bit of some moss if you choose. But I am loving these. I don't know, there's just something about velvet pumpkins that I absolutely love. So I want to know which project was your favorite, and don't forget to check out the playlist right at the end. It will also be pinned in the comments section, and a link will be provided in the description box below. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.